Welcome to month 4 of the Cheshire Quilters Guild 2018 block of the month. This is block 4, the ribbon star. And one of the first things you're going to need to do is, as per the cutting instructions, you're going to have to cut some pieces into triangles, some squares into triangles. And in this case, I'm going to cut this into fourths. And the thing that I want you to know, this is my fabrics B&E, is that I have pressed these with a best press so that I've stabilized the fabric so that it's not as likely to distort as I'm cutting. So I cut in the one direction, oops, and now I need to cut in the other direction, lining up the 45 of my ruler with the edge of the original square and making my triangles. And I've got 2 fabrics layered up, so I'm getting 4 triangles of each one. I also need to cut the small squares of fabric E into triangles. And again, to kind of stabilize the fabric and make it so we're less apt to distort these bias edges I have also taken my 2 squares and I have applied best press to them, so that when I put my ruler on and I cut on the diagonal, now as I handle these squares, I'm much less to stretch and distort them because I've stabilized those edges. Now, to make this block, we're going to start by taking our fabric E and B triangles and sew them together. We're going to take a pair of them and sew them together like this along this edge. So we're going to, that's our first step in making this block. We're going to make 2 of those, and we're also going to take our a pair of our fabric E triangles and sew them on either side of a fabric A square. Now this is important how you orient these. What we want to do is orient them so that the piece comes out looking like, well, there we go, looking like this. So I'm going to stitch them by lining up straight edges, stitching along this side, and then I can rotate the piece and line up these 2 straight edges and stitch on that side. So let me get those 3 things sewn together, our pairs of these triangles and these 3 pieces, and I'll meet you back here. Okay, here's my units from step 1 and 2. I've pressed the seams open as instructed. I'm going to do one other thing. It's not in the instructions, but I'm just going to nip off that little tail hanging there and there. Okay, now step 3 is we want to align the seams, and we're going to sew these pairs of triangles onto our center unit. So because we want to make sure we have those seams lined up nicely, I'm going to pin this, and then I'm going to stitch both sides, and I'll meet you back here when I got that done. Alright, now that we've got these 3 sections sewn together, we're going to trim up the 2 long sides, and we want the seam allowance to be 1/4 of an inch right at the point of this square. Now there's an easy way to know that you've got it lined up the right way as far as this orientation is concerned, because these intersections should be at the 3 and 1/4 inch marks on your ruler. So I'm coming down 3 and 1/4, and I'm making sure that goes through both of those locations, and my point up here, let me move my ruler over so a little further so you can see it. So right there, I'm at 1/4 of an inch at the top. So now I can trim off. Let me just slide it over a little bit further so I'm on along the ruler. I can trim this side. Okay, and now I'm just going to flip it around. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, and then we'll be ready for the next step. Okay, so I've trimmed the two sides down. Now we can move on to making the sections that fit on either side. And we're going to do that by making some flying geese, but using triangles to do that. So I'm going to sew my fabric E triangles onto my fabric B triangles, and so I'm going to go ahead and do that, and I'll meet you back here to see what the next step is. Alright, there's my two geese, and now I'm going to trim them to be 3.5 by 6.5. The simplest way to do that is to use a Tucker Studio 180 wing clipper. So we put the V on the V. Sorry. Turn it around, and then we can trim the other two sides up. Okay, now the other way to do that is with your standard ruler. Let me trim this side first. Again, 6.5 by 3.5, and you want to put your 1/4 inch seam allowance right up at the point, and we also want to bring our 1/4 inch seam allowance down here on the sides. So something along that. And trim it to the 3.5 by 6.5 inch size. 6.5, 3.5. That looks pretty good. Okay, two geese made. Next step is to add our fabric A squares on the end of our geese. So I'm going to go do that and meet you back here, and we'll show you how the final assembly of the block goes together. Now we want to sew these two side sections we just made to either side of the center section, and the key thing you want to do is you want to align this intersection with that intersection. That's the key thing, is to get it so you have these 2 points meeting, and the same thing on the other side. So you're going to want to pin carefully to make sure that you get those to match up, and then stitch your two sides. You're going to have a little extra length here, and that's okay. We're going to trim that off when we get finished. And there we have the Ribbon Star Block 4, the Cheshire Quilters Guild 2018 Block of the Month. The only thing I have left to do is to trim off the dog ears on either end of my fabric B, I believe, of corners here, and that'll be done. So see you next time for Block 5, Indian Star.